Hey guys, it is Thursday, May 9th. Bitcoin is at 62,000. And today I want to just take a little detour and I want to talk about the road to Bitcoin and exactly the extent of Satoshi's discovery. So one of the things that Ben Sigmund and I have been very interested in is really the intellectual DNA of Bitcoin. How did this idea actually happen? What's the archaeology of this decision? How did it happen? And I think you'll find some of this interesting. Some of it's not that well known, but we've sort of documented. This is part of this book that we're writing. Anyways, this is the PDF of the book that you're going to see here. And what I want to show you is, so we basically talk a little bit about sort of the beginning is kind of what is the motivation, why was Bitcoin invented, and I think this is very important, right? So unlike every other crypto project since Bitcoin, Bitcoin was not invented as a means of making money, right? Bitcoin was invented because we're drowning in debt and you can't trust the banks, right? There's this fundamental problem that you can't trust the banks. And that fundamental problem was identified by Satoshi later, but it was identified as early as 1998. And, so there's this idea that we need to find a better version of money. And so that was the kind of more, I'm not going to go into every slide of this motivation section, but now let's talk about the solution to this, right? And I really break it down into the following timeline. The first thing we're going to talk about is 1976. We had the basis of public-private key cryptography, and that's going to be Diffie Helman, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Then in 1992, you had this seemingly unrelated invention by Cynthia Dwork, my friend, and Nair, and that was to solve the spam problem in email. Now, Adam Back in 1997 sort of perfected that and built it into an actual system for spam email. In between, we had sort of the invention of SHA-256, which is the encryption scheme used in Bitcoin by the NSA, right? And there was also this paper about how to make a mint in the NSA. Well, I'm not going to talk about it that much here. I talk about it in the Bitcoin book. And then in 1998, we have these two proposals, right? Both sort of unfinished proposals, and we're going to talk a little bit about each of them, which is this B-Money by Wei Dai and this BitGold paper by Nick Szabo. And I think these two things are the core ancestry of Bitcoin. In fact, Satoshi even says Bitcoin is an implementation of B-Money and BitGold. So he clearly realizes, this is afterwards. He doesn't credit them in the white paper, and that's a whole separate discussion. And then RPOW is actually the first implementation of BitGold by Finney. So let's just talk a little bit through some of this intellectual DNA. So first of all, you had in 1976, you had Diffie Hellman create this idea of public-private key cryptography. I can give you my public key. You can verify that I can sign a message. You can verify that I've signed the message with my public key, but you cannot guess my private key. That was the essential beginning of cryptography in 1976. Now, later in 1992, my friend Cynthia Dwork created really the first concept of proof of work with Moni Naor in 1992. And I got to know Cynthia very well in 1995 because her husband worked with me at my second startup called Random Noise in San Francisco. And so we were very close and we hung out. And obviously I also hung out with Cynthia because David, her husband, was my co-founder. And so we talked about this proof of work idea. And it didn't seem like to me that this proof of work idea was really going to go anywhere, or it didn't seem like it was going to stop email, but it seemed interesting. Anyways, in 1997, Adam Back takes the idea and sort of turns it into this paper called Hashcash, right? So Dwork's paper is not that well documented. It's sort of a prototype paper, and they're talking about solving these square root problems, modulo a certain number. It's just sort of like a vague proposal to do it. Adam Back actually built a system to do it. And then now we get to 1998. 1998 is you have three people, all of which are part of these extropians, right? Which is sort of this society to advance mankind beyond the planet Earth. And guess who's a member of this? Wei Dai is a member of this. A little bit older guy, Nick Szabo, is a member of this. And also Hal Finney is a member of this. Hal Finney and Wei Dai and Nick Szabo know each other before. Hal Finney is the oldest of the three. Wei Dai is the youngest of the three. Just by coincidence, Wei Dai and Nick Szabo both graduate from University of Washington in computer science. And then Wei Dai, after this B-money thing, by the way, he creates this library called Crypto++, which is widely used and is in fact used in the first reference implementation of Bitcoin, which is really interesting, right? Because in not very long, or before that, Adam Back is contacted by Satoshi and says, well, you should look at B-Money by Wei Dai. And Satoshi says, well, I'm not familiar. But actually, Satoshi does use the Wei Dai Crypto++ library in Bitcoin. Now, he could have switched it at the very last minute. I don't think so. He could have not realized that the author of this paper actually also authored B-Money. Seems hard to believe, but I guess everything's possible. We don't know. But this is interesting. So what is B-Money? Okay. Well, B-Money, if you look at this product, it's very interesting. And so it talks about, the idea here is we're going to need some new form of money, right? So how does this money come into existence? Well, both Wei Dai and Nick Szabo start with this idea of anybody should be able to make money, right? And so how are we going to make money? We're going to use a proof of work system to make money. So we're going to use something like Hashcash, something like Cynthia Dwork's proof of work, and we're going to basically take a computational, we're going to solve a hard problem, right? And then that hard problem, as a solution to that hard problem, we're going to get money. And so that's sort of the general idea of both of these two papers. And then that money creation is going to be stored somewhere. Also, another place where it's going to be stored is some decentralized version of who owns what, right? So there's the money creation and there's this record of who owns what. In the Wei Dai's system, whenever you solve one of these puzzles to get more money, you immediately broadcast, you get the money, and then if you send the money to somebody else, you have this notion of broadcasting the fact that I'm sending my money to, say, Ben Sigmund. So I'm going to say, I have some money, some B money, and I'm going to send it to B Sigmund. So I broadcast that, and then everybody is supposed to update their records of this. So this is already this very first notion of broadcasting transactions done through Wei Dai. Okay. So Nick Szabo takes a very different approach. So Nick Szabo says, no, we're going to need this title registry. Not very clear exactly what that is. He's saying we're going to have this somewhat of a decentralized title registry here. And we're going to have these computational puzzles. And as every one of these computational puzzles, once you solve it, you're going to get some form of bit gold, right? So you're going to get this bit gold token. Now, depending on how hard the computational puzzle is, you're going to get sort of more of this token. Now, each of these tokens actually is some kind of an NFT in BitGold. So it's basically you mint a token and you get this, okay, I just minted this BitGold token. And now this BitGold token, let's say I got 582 BitGolds by doing some proof of work. Well, I got 582 BitGolds, and the ownership in the central registry is going to say Fred owns 582 BitGolds. Now, how can I send these BitGolds to somebody else? Well, there's a sort of a general exchange, and there's a market for these BitGolds that is being contemplated. And again, this is purely theoretical. It's not even a complete theoretical paper. It's sort of almost a half-written theoretical paper. But it's very, very, very interesting, okay? So you've got this NFT creation, and then you have this idea of bundling these NFTs in sort of blocks and then selling these blocks. So it's very sort of complicated and doesn't quite work. Now, the other thing that doesn't quite work, and they both Szabo and Wei Dai are well aware of this, is that machines are getting exponentially better, right? So you have Moore's law that's sort of kicking in. These machines are getting better and better. So the bit gold that's mined, you're going to be mining more and more and more bit gold, right? So this is sort of a problem, right? This inflation problem, right? Now we get into RPOW. RPOW basically is an implementation, an actual code implementation. We can't get the code to compile now, but there is code, okay? And, Hal Finney, he's later going to show up as the first person to receive a Bitcoin, but, he basically takes Nick's code, that he wrote 6 years earlier, Nick's paper, and he basically turns it into an actually working system, right? And it's called reusable proof of work, RPOW, right? So now we have a system, right, that we have the idea of sending tokens, no problem. There's some way to send them. We have the idea of mining them using proof of work kind of continuously, right? So not like in big blocks anymore, right? Like now, but sort of continuous, anybody can kind of mine it. And we have this very core idea of decentralization in all three proposals, right? The RPOW, B-Money, and BitGold. So you have this very sort of decentralized idea. We're trying to make this money that could survive anywhere, could survive even on Mars, right? And there's a way to send this money, et cetera, completely independent of governments or completely independent of banks, right? So let's talk about now the solution, right? And I really think this solution is sort of like a mathematically perfect solution to this puzzle. And if I was alive and I knew what I knew now, I probably could tell Wei Dai or Nick Szabo or Hal Finney the solution and it would be so clear, and you could just implement the thing in a month, right? It's just you have to know the solution. So what is the solution? Really, there's four key things to make this thing work. The first key thing is blocks produced at regular intervals. Okay, so now this is critical, right? Because before this, we had every little transaction somehow stored in a database, right? In Szabo's original idea, it was, databases of like this sort of non-fungible bit gold that's produced, right? But now, Satoshi comes up with this idea of saying, no. We're going to make the blocks. at regular intervals, and let's just call it 10 minutes, because we sort of estimate that this is the right number for spreading the information from the miners to each other. And so 10 minutes, we're going to make these blocks. Right. So how do you make sure that it's 10 minutes? Well, we have this idea of a difficulty adjustment. So this is the first thing. It's like, we're going to have a difficulty adjustment, and this difficulty adjustment is going to make sure that, it's going to be roughly 10 minutes. Now, right now, we're going to have a difficulty adjustment going down a little bit in the difficulty. It's probably going to be maybe even 2 difficulty. They're every 2 weeks. But this idea that we're going to try to maintain regular blocks, that's the first key thing, right? That's the first key idea. The second key idea is this idea of finite supply. Now, some Bitcoiners will contest this, but I maintain that the finite supply was not actually, it was sort of a last minute thing, right? So we now know that 21 million was absolutely a last thing. The original supply was going to be in the billions. And then at the end, Satoshi decided, oh, no, I think it's better to have a smaller supply. It'll make it feel more valuable. And so he was going to do it at 52 million, and it was going to be at 100, starting at 100 Bitcoin per reward. And then he said, nah, it still feels too much. I'm going to divide by 2. And he got 21 million. So that's kind of the story of 21 million. But it could have been, it very well could have been an infinite supply of some kind. Right? You could have this scheme. It would solve the double spend problem. It would solve transmitting thing. But it might have been infinite, right? It might say, well, it'll grow according to this curve or something like that. And then there was this, I think it was just like very fortuitous idea that Bitcoin should be the first finite supply currency. And in order to achieve that, of course, we have the halvings. And every 4 years you divide by 2 and you sum them all up and you get 21 million. So that was the second biggest sort of conceptual thing. Not again, just very few lines of code here to do that, right? To make the finite supply, you just say, okay, great. The initial subsidy is here, blah, blah, blah. The max money is here, blah, blah, blah. Same with the difficulty adjustment. Not tons of lines of code. It's just conceptually you had to get there. Now the third thing is, okay, now we're storing these things in blocks. How do we know that the blocks are halfway honest, right? How do we know that? And then Satoshi just said, well, wait, we don't have to do anything. This is just game theory. It's going to work, right? It's actually, if you store things in blocks, it'll work. And the reason it's going to work is, generally speaking, people are going to be competing like crazy to get these blocks, to get the rewards. So it's going to be very hard to get the reward. And nobody's going to have more than a couple percent of hash power. And if you have 10%, let's say you had 10% of the total hash power, and you could choose, am I going to be putting bad transactions in a block? Well, if you can do that, but then the next guy coming after you, which won't be you generally, is going to be building off of your bad data. And if at some point somebody says, there's bad data in this branch of the tree, I don't want to build off of that, you're going to get nothing. Okay, so that's the game theory. And so basically it's longest chain wins in general. It's just, there is no incentive to put bad transactions or a double spend. It's economically does not work, so it's trustless. And that's just really just like, holy cow, we can just count on game theory to keep this thing honest, right? And I think that was just, again, it's a realization more than a technical solution to this thing. And I think the last key thing here was just this idea of voluntary transaction fees, right? So, Satoshi said, oh, you know what? Anybody can actually say, if you want to include my transaction, I can add a little fee. I can tip the miner, okay? And then the miner's going to assemble their blocks, and they can assemble their blocks appropriately with the with whatever you voluntarily put in there. And this is critical for a couple reasons. One, it's critical for in the very long term. Once we have no more rewards, you're gonna need to tip miners to get your blocks in, right? But also, it's, let's say you have a block that's you have a transaction that you put an in. You just put it in, and there's so much other transaction, you now need to push it to the priority. Well, again, you have now voluntary transaction fee, so you can say, this transaction is never getting through. Okay, great. Well, let's do a free market approach, and we'll have voluntary transaction fees. So, here's Satoshi. There will be transaction fees, so nodes will have an incentive to receive and can include the transactions they have. Nobody will be compensated by transaction fees alone when the total coins created hits the predetermined ceiling. Boom. That is Bitcoin. So, again, what does all this mean, really? What is the gist of this? Well, the gist of all this is that Satoshi gave sort of what we call in math a canonical solution, right, to this problem. So let me just stop the sharing here. Okay, great.